Welcome to part 8 in this series of videos where we will be creating a birthday reminders application using a Blazor server project. In this part we'll be looking at saving a record, data validation and checking for duplicates. It's a fact of life that users, either intentionally or unintentionally, will do their level best to enter invalid data. We will use a combination of data annotations, C# code and SQL to guard against invalid data being written to the database. To allow us to test our validation methods, we will initially allow invalid data to be added to the database. So let's look at the code for doing this. If we look at the code for the index page and scroll down, we have got currently a method for person save, but we've got no code within here. So I'm just going to post in the code that I think we'll need. And just to explain what this is doing, this is the line that's doing the hard work. That's actually calling the person service person insert, and I'm passing into it the person add edit object that we create using the dialog. So that will save it when we click save. But then I want the grid to reflect that we've just added a person. So we will effectively requery the grid using this line, and status changed just makes sure that the system is aware that we've changed some data. At that point, the data that we've entered in the dialog box will still remain there. So the next line is to create a new person object, which will have the effect of blanking out the form. But that will also get rid of the person's default date of birth and the person to send the reminder to. So we have to restate what the defaults are for there. So let's run that and see what happens. With the application running, we can now click the add button and we can enter the details of a new contact. Let's call him John Smith. And I won't do anything with the date of birth. So I'll click save, and that now gets saved. If we look, we can now see that we've got our record here. If I add again and enter John, but leave the last name blank, I can save it. If I enter the last name but leave the first name blank, I can save it. And if I enter a duplicate, that will also get saved. And if I just click save, I get a record added. So you can see here the data's going in and we're getting duplicates and mismatches and things like that. So we really don't want that. The first line of defense against invalid data is data annotations. And the code generator we used added some basic data annotations to the person model. However, we can improve on this in a couple of ways. The first is that we will be adding error messages. So for example, where we've got a required field, such as the person's name, we can put in an error message here that will get displayed on the form. And the second thing is for something like the person send reminder to, that's always going to be an email address. So we could put in here email address, and that will ensure that that field is always an email address. Now in this particular case I think that's overkill because we're completing this field automatically with a valid email address anyway, but that's to demonstrate what can be done. For numeric, there's another option that says range, and I thought about using that for the person date of birth. I wanted to check that we weren't going to get somebody entering a date of birth in the future, but with the range I found that I wasn't able to put in the current date as the end of a range, so we're going to have to tackle that slightly differently. So as I say, the first thing I want to do is to add some error messages to first name and last name. And to add error messages, there are basically three things we need to do. We need to put in here what the error message is going to be, and then we'll need to return to the index page to put in some code there. So let's start off by putting in the error messages that we want here. Now for first name, I'm just going to replace required with this, and this is the form or format of the error message. So in the attribute that we're trying to show the error message for, we show error message equals and then the description of the error message that we want shown. Now I want error messages all over here, so I'm just going to quickly replace what we've got in here with my revised version. This is the revised version. So as before, we've got the error message saying the first name is required, but I've also added additional error messages to say that the first name has a maximum length of 50. Similar for last name. I've said that the date of birth is compulsory, and just for completion rather than anything else, I've put some error messages on the send reminder to field as well. So that's stage one. The next stage is we need to go to the index page, which is where we want the error messages shown, and we want the error messages shown in the dialog. So this is the dialog, and within the edit form tag we need to put this code. So that tells the dialog form that we're going to be using data annotations. With just that, we would get error messages on the required fields and things like that, but we wouldn't get the error messages displayed. So if we quickly demonstrate that. If I try saving this now, these fields are shown with a red border around them. So the user knows that there's something wrong with this, but they wouldn't necessarily know what is wrong. So that's where it's useful to put in the error messages. So let's have a look at that. And the way we put in the error messages is very simple. We put in a little bit of code, and it says validation message for, and then the field name. Now where we place this is significant. Here I've placed it underneath the text box. If I was to place it above the text box, that's where the error message would show. Or alternatively, if I put it, for example, underneath the last text box, the error message would appear at the bottom of the form. And since we might have multiple error messages, we might like to consider how we're going to deal with this. I'm going to just change this code here so we add all the error messages. So I've added all the error messages here. So we've got the validation message for first name, last name, date of birth, and person to send the reminder to. So how does this look? If we click add now, and I put in John, but leave the last name blank. If I try clicking save, I get the error message, last name is required. And the same if I try leaving the first name blank. So that seems to be making sure that we've got the first name and last name in. Let me just try something else. Let's put in a very, very long name. and I get the error message, first name has a maximum length of 50 characters. So we're checking that the user fills in a name and doesn't exceed the maximum length. Now, I did wonder, it did cross my mind, whether a user, being an awkward customer, if they just put in a space in these, whether that would save it. And lo and behold, it doesn't. So surprisingly and thankfully, the user can't just put in a space, but they could put in a valid combination of just a single letter. So that would fulfill the requirements. But we're still left with this date of birth. I can put in, and let's go back and put in something slightly more meaningful. And I could put in a date of birth of, let's say, 3rd of April, and it would accept it. Now I want to guard against the date of birth either being in the future or being too far in the past. So I could put in here 1900, and that would make the person about 122. Well, it would do if I filled in the name. And that's valid. So I want to check that the person isn't 120 and they're not born in the future. And we're going to have to do that in code. So returning to the code, and we're going to have to tackle this at the person save method. So in here, I'm going to check that the date of birth hasn't been entered as being in the future. And I'm just going to paste in the code for that. So what I'm doing here is, in all cases, I want to check for the reasonableness of the date of birth. And the first thing is I'm going to make sure it's not in the future. And that's relatively straightforward. I'm saying if the person date of birth is greater than now, then I want to show a warning. And the warning is going to say, warning, it looks like the date of birth is wrong, it's in the future. And to do this, I'm going to be using a new Blazor component. I'm going to call it warning, and I'm going to place it in the shared folder. So let me just do that without further ado. So I'm going to create shared. I'm going to create add a new component, and it's going to be called warning page. .razor, and I'm going to paste in the code that I need here. And what this code does, it's another dialog box. I'm giving it a reference of dialog warning. I'm giving it a visible parameter. I'm saying it's modal. I've got a width of 300 pixels, and I'm having the close icon shown. And then it's got, within the dialog template, it's got a tag for header and a tag for content, and that's where we're going to be passing in the warnings from our index page. And it's just going to have a button that says OK, and it's going to have an event for closing the dialog. So here we're declaring the dialog box, and the Boolean is visible, and we've got two parameters, the warning header message and the warning content message. And we've got two simple methods for opening the dialog and closing the dialog. So that's the new component called warning page. But back in index, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, you can see we've got squiggly red lines under here. We need to add at the bottom here the new component. And this is the code for the new component. It's warning page, it's called warning, and we've got a header message and a content message. In addition to that, we need to declare the warning page in this together with the header header message and the content. So we'll place that at the bottom of these other declarations. So that's added that, and we should see that the red squigglies under here have now gone. So if the person's date of birth is in the future, we should now get an error message. So let's just test that. So let's enter Mary Smith, and she's going to be born in the future. And I get the message, it looks like the date of birth is wrong, it's in the future. So I can't save that with a future date. So let's check for if it's the date of birth would make the person older than, say, 105. So this is the code for checking that the person is not born in the future. The code for checking the person isn't more than, say, 105 is a lot more complicated. I'll just paste it in. So this is the code for checking whether the date of birth would make the person more than 105 years old. And I'll try and explain it, but it's not the simplest thing to understand. So first of all, I'm declaring a date time of time 0. And that's a new date time, and I'm passing in a date of effectively the 1st of the 1st of the 1st. Then I'm declaring a time span, and a time span represents an interval basically in days, and that's going to be today's date minus the date of birth. And then we get this very complicated thing here. Because we're starting at year 1, we've got to subtract a year from this difference. So I'm saying we've got an integer of years, and that's going to be time 0, which is effectively the 1st of the 1st of the 1st, plus the number of days, and I'm converting that into years and subtracting 1. You can play around with these dates on a calculator. It's amazing that a human brain can just say whether someone is 105 or not without thinking about it, but actually trying to calculate it is a lot more tricky. And it depends on whether the person's birth date, for example, I'm recording this on the 13th of March 2022. If they were born before the 13th of March, subtracting, say, 1900 from 2022 would give 122. But if they were born after the 13th of March, it would still give them 122, but they'd actually be only 121, and this kind of corrects for that. This seems complicated, and it's needed to be. Just as a matter of trial and error, I tried declaring a double, calling age in days, which was this total span. And then I thought, all right, okay, well, we'll just convert that to an integer by dividing that by 365.25. But at the boundaries, that gives errors. For example, playing around with dates around the current date, a day before or a day after, you'll see that it gives the wrong age, particularly if the person was born before the year 2000. So that's the horrible calculation. And what I'm saying here is if the years is greater than 105, show the warning, open the dialog and return. This is important. So I've got an if statement here. If we hit that condition, it just stops this code dead in its tracks. And the same actually goes for checking that they're not born in the future. So let's have a go and just double check that that's working correctly. Let's add a new record and check that it doesn't allow someone's age to be over 105. So let's have a date of 2nd of February 1915. Click Save, and we get an error message. It says, it looks like the date of birth is wrong. They would be 107 years old. So that's working. If we go back to the code, you'll see that this is where I'm declaring or displaying their age, the variable years. Right, the next thing I want to tackle is duplicates. A person may be known to more than one user, but I want to prevent the same person being duplicated for the same user. After all, nobody wants to send their brother 2 birthday presents. We'll tackle this at the SQL level by replacing the existing stored procedure for inserting a new person with a revised stored procedure. So let's have a look at that. This is the revised stored procedure. So what I'm doing here is, first of all, I'm dropping the existing person insert stored procedure. Then we're going to create the new stored procedure with the same name. And the parameters we're going to pass in are the person's first name, last name, date of birth, and who to send the reminder to. I'm also declaring a result value, which is an integer. And then we begin the transaction. So the first thing we do is this if statement, and we're saying if, and then we're doing a select from the existing data, saying select from person where the person's first name is equal to the parameter being passed in, last name, date of birth, and who to send reminder to. And if it finds a record, i.e. there's a duplicate, it sets the result value to 99 and then effectively finishes. If it doesn't find a duplicate, then the insert is carried on as before, and we set the result value to @error, which happens to be 0. Then if the result value doesn't equal 0, i.e. equals 99, we roll back the transaction, otherwise we commit it. So that's how the stored procedure works. So I'll just execute that. And now we move back to the C# code, where we'll need to modify the person service for the person insert as well as the interface. So if we look at the, it's still running. So if we look at the person service and look for the insert, we'll see here it's a Boolean. Now we're getting back from the stored procedure an integer, which is either going to be 0 or 99. So this is the code that we need to replace. And to make life simple, I'll copy and paste some revised code in there. So this is the revised code. It's very similar, other than it's saying it's now it's going to return an integer. So we're setting success as 99. The success is just a variable. We're then trying to run the stored procedure, and notice we've had to add the return value in here, and the direction is a return value. We're then running the stored procedure and setting the success variable to the value of the return value, which will either be 99 or 0. 0 being success, 99 being failure. So we've got this here, but we now need to change the interface, which was Boolean. We just need to change that to be an integer. So just change that from Boolean to integer. And that's now working correctly. The last thing we need to do to check for duplicates is to actually change the code on the index page. So here's the person save. So we're checking for date of birth and so on. and we're now awaiting the person insert. So here is the code for adding a new contact, and we need to change effectively this section. So again, I'll copy and paste some revised code in here. This is the revised code, and what I'm doing here is declaring an integer variable called success, and I'm assigning to that the result of the attempt to insert a person into the table. So if success is not equal to 0, it has failed. So we're going to show a warning saying this person already exists, it cannot be added again. Otherwise, we're going to refresh the person list, clear the form for adding a new person, and reinserting the defaults. So that should now prevent duplicates being entered into the system. So we'll try that. I've already got John Smith here. In fact, I've got John Smith twice, both with a date of birth of the 31st of December 2000. So let's try adding another John Smith. Try saving, and I get an error message saying he can't be added again. So that looks good. Let's try adding a John Smith with a different date of birth. So let's make it 1980. And that saves fine. Let's just try another. Let's try Mary Smith. And I'll have her being born on 2000. I can save her. That works. And I'll try Mary Smith again. Let's say in 1980. And it successfully saves that. Let's try Mary Smith yet again. Again with 1980. And I can't. So the duplicate checking it seems to be working just fine. Well, I think that more or less concludes it for this video. In the next video, we'll look at editing and deleting records, and we've got plenty of dodgy data in here which we can delete. I'll put a link in the description of the video for any useful links, such as the Blazor code link for this particular video. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully the next video shouldn't be too long coming along. Thank you very much.